If the name Dick Harpootlian sounds familiar to you, it's probably because he was involved in one of the most high-profile murder cases in the past 20 years. He was one of Alex Murdaugh's defense attorneys in South Carolina and represented Alec during his trial in 2023. It was during his involvement in the Murdaugh case that Harpootlian realized just how popular the true crime genre is, and he realized he might have some of his own stories to tell from his more than 30-year career in law. One story stood out among the rest. His involvement in ensuring prolific serial killer Pee Wee Gaskins was executed on South Carolina's death row. Today, I'm sharing an interview with Dick Harpootlian, where we discuss his evolving views on the death penalty, how he first met Pee Wee Gaskins, why he believes the killer was such a threat to his community, and how he felt about being portrayed on screen in the Hulu scripted series Murdaugh, Death in the Family. There is much to love about North and South Carolina, but the two states have also had their fair share of violent and senseless crimes over the years. From murders on the Blue Ridge Parkway, in the heart of big cities or sleepy college towns, and along the coastal waters, some of these stories may be new to you. Some may have happened in your town. Some may involve people that are still missing to this day. But all will leave you remembering to always be vigilant about the people you meet and the places you go. I'm Renee Robertson. Please join me for Missing in the Carolinas. Dick Harpootlian is one of South Carolina's leading courtroom advocates with 30 years of trial experience as a prosecutor, defense attorney, and civil litigator. As the Fifth Circuit's chief homicide prosecutor, Mr. Harpootlian personally prosecuted hundreds of murder cases, including 12 death penalty cases. For the last 20 years, Mr. Harpootlian's private practice has earned him state and national recognition for his efforts on behalf of civil litigants and criminal defendants. He has appeared on 60 Minutes, Good Morning America, ABC Nightly News, NBC Nightly News, Dateline NBC, and various CNN, MSNBC, CNBC, and Fox News broadcasts. Dick's co-author, Sean Astle, has written 4 books about crime, culture, and sports. His biography of wrestling czar Vince McMahon, Sex, Lies, and Headlocks, was a New York Times bestseller, and the murder of Sonny Liston was made into a feature-length documentary by Showtime. He has received numerous awards as a writer and on-air correspondent. His website is seanastle.com. The book, Dig Me a Grave, published by Kensington Publishing Corporation, releases on December 16th of this year and is available for pre-order already wherever you buy your books. You can learn more at his website, dickharpootlian.com. Here's the synopsis of Dig Me a Grave. Of the hundreds of murder cases that noted South Carolina attorney Dick Harpootlian has prosecuted, one in particular haunts him. Donald Pee Wee Gaskins was a serial killer and rapist, a master manipulator who claimed to have killed over 100 people and is known to have murdered over a dozen, including a toddler and his own teenage niece. Yet it was on death row that he pulled off his most audacious murder, killing another inmate with a military-grade explosive. As personable as he was ruthless, Pee Wee defied easy categories. He killed to avenge minor slights as well as for pleasure, using any convenient method, including stabbing, shooting, poison, suffocation, and drowning. Evidence suggested he forced at least one victim to dig his own grave, stand in it, and be shot. With escalating callousness, Pee Wee murdered acquaintances, friends, family members, and strangers. Yet within his North Charleston community, he was well liked, a family man who took neighborhood kids to the beach and hosted cookouts. Ice cold within, but outwardly charming, he joked with judges, reporters, and Harpootlian himself, but didn't hesitate to hatch a plot to kidnap the prosecutor's daughter in order to extort an escape. Dig Me a Grave is a haunting look at a prolific, remorseless killer, as well as a provocative exploration of justice and the death penalty. Thank you for joining us today, Dick.
Okay, so for any of my listeners who aren't aware of who Donald Pee Wee Gaskins was, could you share a little bit about the South Carolina resident and what he became infamous for?
Donald Pee Wee Gaskins was born in the PD area of South Carolina, which is the area around Florence, South Carolina, which is basically surrounded by pine forest and swamp. It is part of what we call the low country in South Carolina. That's where the low country begins and goes towards the coast, where it becomes swampier, marsh-like, of course, when you get near the coast. He was the most prolific killer in South Carolina, having pled guilty to killing 13 people, and I prosecuted him for his 14th murder, which was basically blowing up a guy on death row. That is the most secure wing of the most secure facility in South Carolina's prison system. And he smuggled in 1/4 pound of C4 explosive and blew the guy's head off. Even before that, in the 70s, when he got convicted and then pled guilty to other murders, he was so brazen and so cocky and so affable. I mean, I met the guy obviously in a courtroom, that he conned everybody. He drove a hearse around. People joked about it. He had bodies in the back of that hearse. And for a generation of South Carolinians, he was the boogeyman. I mean, people have called me after they've seen that this book is coming out and saying, when I was growing up, my mama told me, if you don't do right, Pee Wee's going to get you. So he was a prolific killer and killed, not a serial killer in the sense of a Bundy or a John Wayne Gacy or those folks. He killed when it was convenient to him or pleased him to do it. Race, he was a horrible racist and killed a former girlfriend and her child because she was pregnant by a black man and the child was a mixed race. So, thank you. I'm trying to keep my throat a little lubricated here. He was convicted, arrested in 1982 for killing the inmate on death row. I prosecuted him in the summer of 83. He was sentenced to death and he was executed in 91. 2 weeks before his execution, he tried to have my 4-year-old daughter kidnapped and held hostage to try to negotiate his release. He was, wasn't brilliant, but he was cagey. He was always looking for an avenue to escape or get advantage.
Yeah, I think you kind of described, one of my questions was, why do you think he was such a danger to the community? And I think you kind of hit the nail on the head there, that I don't know if it's because he blended in or he wasn't very educated or he just ingratiated himself to other people, but he seems like he was very wily and very street smart, but also very charismatic. He had to be. All the women that you talk about in your book that he romanced and married.
6 times. Married.
Yeah.
6 times. Never had a divorce, mind you, but married 6 times. He was charismatic. And I mean, I met him, I remember the first time I saw him in a courtroom was in 82. And unlike I prosecuted dozens of murders and various other serious crimes. As he came into the courtroom, he looked over at me, waved with his handcuffs on. Hey, Dick, how you doing? And of course, my immediate response, being, sort of a Southerner, was respond, hey, Pee Wee, how you doing? I mean, it was just sort of a meaningless, harmless exchange. But from that point forward, it was Dick and Pee Wee. And as you read in the book, there's an encounter between him and me at a lunch break in which, I think that's one of the reasons I needed to write this book, was to put that accusation by him that I was a killer like him. He found it somewhat humorous, somewhat to just sort of try to get in my head and say, you're a killer like me. I said, no, I'm not. He said, yeah, you're trying to kill me and you're liking it. You're enjoying killing me. The fact that he had whether he was wily or whatever, he always convinced, of course, the people he was dealing with in his posse, if you will, were not the sharpest knives in the drawer. And it was very easy for him to manipulate them and to manipulate police officers and judges. And until it finally caught up to him once and for all.
One of the things that I'm curious about is, so you ended up, when he killed the inmate after he was already incarcerated for all his other crimes, had you heard a lot about his crimes before that murder happened?
Absolutely. I was in law school, just graduating and beginning to be a prosecutor when the so-called Prospect murders, because that's where the bodies were buried, Prospect, South Carolina, were uncovered. And every other week there was a new body, and every other week there was, a new revelation until he confessed. And one of the reasons that this book got written is, let me pull this up and show it to you. One of the exhibits in the trial was this 500-page transcript of Pee Wee's confession to Solicitor Ken Summerford over in Florence. In exchange for confessing to his murders, he got life for all of them. He was originally tried and sentenced to death on 2 of them. And then a case called Furman versus Georgia came down from the Supreme Court, U.S. Supreme Court, negating those. He probably could not have been retried for any of those or tried for any murder for death. But Summerford convinced him, look, if you tell me about all the murders you did, we'll give you life for each one of them. We won't go for the death penalty. And so he did that. And this transcript is very detailed. He describes each one. And that gave us the ability in this book to flesh those out and corroborate them with law enforcement statements, statements that were made by other people at the time. So one of the things I'm very proud of in this book is There's very little speculation. Almost everything is nailed down by either autopsy results or his statement or other witnesses.
So you think there's a lot of information in this book that has never been in the public record before?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, a bunch of it was read into the record at the trial in '83, but not all of it, not the detail that you have here.
It is very detailed. I will tell the readers and the listeners that. In your book, you discuss how Pee Wee tried to befriend you while he was on death row. How did you handle his overtures, and did it make you uneasy?
I spent 8 years prior to prosecuting him going to murder scenes, talking to murder defendants, witnessing the horrendous carnage involved in many of those cases. So being around Pee Wee didn't make me anxious. However, the guy that defended him was a guy named Jack Swirling, appointed by the court. And he and I had known each other since my Clemson days. After the trial was over, I quit the solicitor's office. He quit. He was working for Senator Lurie in his law firm. And we went into practice together. So Pee Wee would routinely, and how the hell he got access to a phone? It's just amazing. He's on death row, and yet routinely we get calls from him. Again, he conned some guard to let him have access to a phone. And he called the office and talked to Jack and I just in a very casual, almost humorous tone. I remember Jack was representing a guy who was a real serial killer, Larry Gene Bell, and he was incarcerated in what they call the Maximum Detention Retraining Center, MDRC, which was the hole. And it was about 18 feet underground, almost a Silence of the Lambs looking place, except no glass. It was all very, very heavily secured. And I went down, Jack was out of town. He needed a videotape of Larry Gene decompensating. I went down and did that. And when I left, the guard comes up and says, the inmate in the cell next door wants to say, hey. I said, what? Who is it? Pee Wee Gaskins. So I go over and there's a big metal solid door with, the bolt heads on it. They pull that back and then there's a barred door. And Pee Wee says, Dick, how you doing? He talked this very high pitched. I said, I'm doing fine, Pee Wee. How about you? Oh, okay. And he had these drawings in his hand, these colored pencil drawings. And he was very proud of one of Jack and me. It wasn't very good, but it was sort of crude. But he said, I've been drawing these. What do you think? And I said, oh, Pee Wee, they're just, what are you going to say? They're very good. They're very good. And he said, yeah. I said, they're probably worth something. And he got all beaming and everything. And then in sort of a gallows humor sense, I said, and they're worth something now. They're going to be worth a lot more real soon. And then when he figured out what that meant, I'd never forget, he had a pencil in his hand, and my immediate thought was, can he throw that hard enough to hit me in the eye? And so we said goodbye. That was the last conversation I had with Pee Wee, and he was executed probably 4 years later.
Yeah, one of the things you discuss at great length in Dig Me a Grave is your stance on the death penalty. How has that changed from the time you were early on in your career as an attorney and now?
Well, when I was at Clemson in the late 60s, like any sort of college kid, not any, but people like me who were examining their beliefs. I became very pro-civil rights. I became very against the war. And the death penalty seemed to be morally repugnant, reprehensible. As I began my career as a prosecutor, which is happened as described in the book, was not really a planned move, but I ended up as a prosecutor. I began to see the carnage, began to see the havoc wreaked by some of these folks. And as I took an oath to enforce the law, and the law was that for certain kinds of murders, well, actually back then, any murder, the penalty was death unless the jury recommended mercy. This is pre-Supreme Court decision. So in August of 1975, as detailed in the book, I prosecuted a man who shot and killed a waitress at a huddle house here. The jury at 10 o'clock on Monday morning, he was sentenced to death 2 o'clock Tuesday afternoon. And I began to appreciate what had I just done. And as the years went by, my position on the death penalty became, if the conduct is reprehensible, if it is enough, it ought to be appropriate. Not every armed robbery, murder, but ones that typified reprehensibility and reprehensibility of the defendant. Would he do it again? Of course, Pee Wee, after 13, does another one. I mean, if not him, who? But as recounted in the book, I had a conversation with my father, who was a bomber pilot in World War II, B-17, pre-D-Day, Berlin. They got decimated by German fighters and anti-aircraft. And I said to him, Dad, I'm wrestling with this killing. I'm going to be part of a process which kills somebody. And, how did you handle that? I said, you bombed Berlin and thousands of people were killed, maybe hundreds of thousands. How did you reconcile that with, and he was very religious, with your religious beliefs, thou shalt not kill. He said, look, those were acts of self-defense. He said, when you are acting in self-defense for society, killing is reprehensible under any circumstance, but it can be justified and can be accommodated if it's self-defense. And so Gaskins, he killed 13 times and had those 13 life sentences, and then took it, not for money. Tyner was black. He killed the Moons, executed them during an armed robbery. They were white. Pee Wee felt that was unacceptable. And so when their son connected with him to kill Tyner on death row, they first tried poison, and then there's a tape recording of video that he made of him and Simo talking about getting some explosives and blowing his head off. He is, if you listen to his tone in that conversation, it's gleeful. It is yucking it up about, sit back and listen for the boom. If not him, who? You give him another life sentence? Where are you going to keep him when we won't kill somebody else? And so when I was elected solicitor, and the decision was mine, I only went for the death penalty with literally a dozen times I could have done it, one out of the time. And that was a young man who was a serial rapist and murderer of women over the age of 80. I got him the death penalty, African-American, with 6 African-Americans on the jury. I argued it in front of the United States Supreme Court, and they invalidated a part of our South Carolina law, and it was commuted to life. I'm not upset about that. I'm not angry about that. I did my job. They did their job. And what concerns me are the prosecutors I met who have, like a gallows on their desk or go to witness the executions, not reluctantly, but they really want to see somebody die. I don't understand it. I don't approve of that.
What do you think of I was just writing about Todd Kohlhepp, which I know you're probably familiar with in South Carolina, and how he agreed to confess to all, seven murders that he committed in South Carolina in exchange for not getting the death penalty. What do you think about those cases where someone is never going to get out of prison, but they also won't be sitting around waiting on death row? Do you think that's a fair, if the families of the victims agree with it, do you think that's a fair compromise?
A number of things go into that kind of decision but behind the scenes. How strong is the case that you have against that person? Because if it's a circumstantial case that is not 100% lock, juries tend not to give the death penalty anyway. If they're not certain they did it, then they will hesitate to give the death penalty. And all it takes is one to say, I'm not sure. So that's one primary consideration. The second consideration is, did he confess to murders they weren't aware of, that they had not already connected to him? So you clear those up. And the third is, obviously, the victim's input is important, but their perspective, the death penalty is not an act of vengeance. It is an act of removing somebody from society, either because of the egregiousness of their acts or the threat they pose, and I think primarily the threat they pose in the future. Victims' wishes are always important, but they don't get it. They don't, in my world, when I was prosecuting, they didn't get a negative checkoff.
Yeah. So for Pee Wee, I know you're not a medical professional, but do you think he is just one of those people that was born bad? That from the time he was small, he had a switch that could be flipped really easily? Just the way he had no qualms about killing anyone just isn't normal behavior.
Oh, let's hope not. I think if you sort of peel the onion on this, and the records are somewhat clear, he was, as a toddler, may have been sexually abused in other ways. We know when he got to the Florence School, Industrial School for White Boys, that's what it was called, the 40s. He was in a large room where everybody slept, a dormitory every night. He was the smallest guy there. And he said and pointed out that he was horribly molested for the years he was there. And at some point, people snap. So I'm not sure he was born that way, but certainly the sexual abuse and physical abuse as he suffered as a small child up until we see age 14. And what's interesting, as we noted in the book, he is sent to the psychiatric hospital in Columbia by the superintendent of that school. And in there he puts, this is a young man with homicidal tendencies. He is diagnosing him at 14. He's going to be a killer. So this isn't something that happened later on. This wasn't an act of vengeance. And I believe there was a sexual component in it. I think Pee Wee got sexually aroused when he killed somebody. There's indications, never really graphically pointed out, but there are indications of that. And he, as he said to me, liked killing. He enjoyed it. And as a result, I think it's important to understand that this was self-gratification. Where you or I might not speak to somebody if we thought they had done us wrong for 6 months or a year or ever, he would have to resolve that conflict by killing them. And he did it and got away with it for years. And so I guess he became emboldened. But understand, after he's caught, sentenced to death, commuted to life, 13 life sentences. And by the way, he was eligible for parole with those 13 life sentences. Technically in the 70s to eligible after 10 years. And he built a record having his wife and kids come. I mean, he makes it clear, I'm trying to get, it's important for you to come see me. So there's a record, I have a supportive family. And she's whining about it. And he basically got really tough with her and said, you better be here. So I don't think was he born that way? Maybe. I mean, I'm not a doctor, as you point out, but certainly at a very young age. At 12, he took a axe to a next door neighbor's daughter who was caught him breaking in the house. So he had those propensities from a very young age. Now, whether he came out of the womb that way or not, I don't think any of us know.
So why did you decide to write about this experience now?
Well, when you say now, it started 3 or 4 years. It started during 20 years ago. I began thinking, this is a pretty interesting story, unique in effect. And so I started playing around with it, never really got anywhere. I might get a chapter written, and I'm not a professional writer. So during the pandemic, I got an agent, and the agent said, do you want to write this yourself? You want somebody to help you? I said, I want somebody to help me, but I don't want a ghostwriter. I mean, if somebody's going to participate in this process, they ought to have their name on the book. So
that's nice.
I interviewed, well, it's not nice. I think it's disingenuous to do otherwise. Anyone puts their name on it, says, I wrote this, and they did not on their own. I mean, it's one thing to write it and have it edited. It's another thing to work in a collaborative way with somebody on writing a book, and that's what we did. So it says Dick Harpootlian with Sean Assail, who himself is a New York Times bestseller writer. He did a biography of Sonny Liston that was a bestseller. In the pandemic, we're interviewing everybody by Zoom. You're not going anywhere. So I interviewed 6 or 7 of them, and he was one of them, and narrowed it down to a couple. And then felt there was a chemistry between the two of us. He and I talked for a while, and then so I hired him, and we started writing. Again, I pointed out that 500-page confession. It wasn't just that. In 1991, when I was a solicitor here, and Pee Wee had been executed, the clerk of court came to me and said, we've got all these exhibits from the trial, and we're going to throw them out. Do you want them? I said, oh, yeah. So for 20 years, I have a full-scale model of Cell Block 2. The FBI did. I've got all the tapes. I've got Pee Wee talking to his wife. I got him talking to Simo. I've got all kinds of recordings. And I've got letters. I've got, again, all the exhibits plus more. And so I had that treasure trove sitting in a storage unit here, my law office. And so when we began to write the book, we pulled those out and went, oh my God, this is more than we even thought we had. We went out and interviewed virtually every law enforcement officer that was involved, most of whom are in their 70s or 80s now. We interviewed Al Waters, who was the guy that found Pee Wee's tapes, Department of Corrections. And so we put all this together and said, boy, this is a pretty good book. And we continued to work. And my life stopped for about 6 months. I got involved in this little case called Murdaugh. And so we stopped. And, I have prosecuted or defended televised cases, murder cases. I had a court TV, gavel-to-gavel death penalty case I defended 20 years ago. And when you got back to the office at night, there might have been a phone call from some guy in Arizona telling you how you'd screwed up that day, but not what we saw in Murdaugh. Social media had just not existed back then. So I can remember walking up to the courthouse early in the trial and seeing people in sleeping bags on the courthouse lawn so they could be one of the first 200 and get a seat in the courtroom. Some guy from Kansas wanted an autograph. I mean, think about that, an autograph. I said, where are you from? Kansas. What are you doing here? We want to see the trial. Hey, buddy, it's on television. You can sit in Kansas and watch it. He said, I want to be a part of it. I said, just being in the audience makes you a part of it? He said, yeah. So what I realized was there was this tremendous appetite, as you know, because your podcast is about true crime, to see it, to not just on TV, but to see the witness in 3-dimensional terms and to watch the interplay between the body language and all of that. And the video camera caught most of that. But being there was important to these folks. Somewhere around 10 million people watched that. So when I came out of that, I said to Sean, I said, we need to finish this thing, because I never realized it was just kind of, at one point we were talking about self-publishing, because we thought, if we sold a few thousand copies, it'd be, not a vanity project, but this is something I wanted to do, get it done. Well, my publisher, got a publisher, no huge advance. I mean, it's not, I'm not John Grisham, but Kensington Press, and they're sub part of a couple major houses. It took a year from the time we finished the manuscript. It'll be over a year when it's published on December 12th. There's a process, editing, getting permission for using photographs, making sure that you haven't, there's something called fair use. I can quote from a newspaper, but I can't use the whole article kind of thing. None of this was familiar to me. So, I'm talking to their lawyers and talking to their editors. And then after you approve all that, it takes probably 6 months for it to be paginated, edited, proofread again. And then, on December 16th, we'll see the final product. And of course you can pre-order it. But, and the title, Dig Me a Grave, is a quote from Pee Wee. During one of his murders, he's telling somebody, dig me a grave. So I thought, that's sort of the process I went through, but I wasn't going to say, wasn't writing this book to be, again, my framework was that had been, these people are interested in this. I didn't know about true crime aficionados. Jim Griffin and I went to CrimeCon the summer after the trial. 8,000 people there. Of course, they didn't like us because we were defending somebody. I think I'll probably be the good guy in this movie, and been invited back for next year. It was a story, and again, one of the things I'm getting ready to write a letter to a guy named Philip Galanis, who is a writer for the New York Times. He writes something called Social Graces in the style section. Not something I read. My wife reads it a lot. But he and I ended up this is 20 years ago, in a boot camp, really nice boot camp, where they control what you eat and you hike 5 hours a day. The idea was to get fit and lose weight, which we did. But at night, he tells stories about his career and his background, that everybody would. And I told Pee Wee stories. And Galana said to me, you need to write a book. That was 18 years ago. So, I've got this done. It's out. I hope people like it. I think it's written in a entertaining way. It's not dry, and it's a little bit about me. And I think I have some interesting stories about other cases in there. I hope people like it. I hope we've written something that people, when they get finished reading it, say, hey, I've learned something. But more importantly, I was entertained by it.
It's like the things that he did, and at the pace that he did them, and the fact that, he had this carnival background where he worked with carnivals. It makes for something like you would see out of a Hollywood movie. It really does. And I'm not just saying that to flatter you, but it's very page turning, and you're thinking, was someone like this really running around South Carolina? He was. I'm curious, you mentioned all the media attention in the Murdaugh case. Did you ever do any back then when you were prosecuting, or when Pee Wee was on death row? Did you ever do any media interviews back then?
No.
Like televised, any documentaries, anything like that?
Well, the only documentary I know was something done by ETV. It's not bad. And they've got actual footage of him taking people out and showing where the bodies were.
It's interesting that would be who would produce something like that.
No, but on ETV, you can watch it. You can go on Google ETV Pee Wee, and you can watch the thing free right now. But nobody, the idea of a documentary back then, remember, this is 40 years ago, 30 years ago, was alien. They weren't, maybe they were doing documentaries on rock divers in Mexico or something. I don't know. But no, there was no real true crime. That's very much when I say recent, of the last decade. And of course, with the advent of Hulu and HBO and all these Netflix, all these streaming platforms, has promoted that more. I appeared in a Murdaugh documentary that Fox did, Fox Streaming, and I'd never been in one before. I was amazed at how that works. And we've been approached by a couple of documentary producers to talk about Pee Wee, but I'm too busy trying to get the book out to worry about documentaries. I'm flattered that it's gotten the kind of reception. You liked it. I've gotten calls from people. I've done a number of interviews with people that review books. The Garden and Gun just had a review this month. Very flattering. So, I mean, I'm a trial lawyer, I stand in front of juries and I want to make sure they're buying what I'm selling, 12 people at a time. And so it's very gratifying to get that feeling from people that read the book, unless all of them are lying to me. It's like arguing to a jury that's smiling and nodding with you and they come back with a verdict against you. It happens. But I think so far, I think it's gotten pretty good. And look, I read true crime when I was a young prosecutor. Bugliosi wrote Helter Skelter, which was the Manson, and then Till Death Do Us Part, which was they were both very intriguing true crime novels about cases that we were aware of, but didn't know the intricate details. And, that left a lasting impression with me. So I'm not a newfound true crime aficionado. But by the way, I also like fictional crime novels. Lee Childs is extraordinary. And I tell you who you ought to get on your show is a guy named Billy Webster, who's just come out with a book called Rocket's Red Glare, which is a fictional crime story, but extraordinarily entertaining. And he's from South Carolina.
Oh, okay.
He's I just finished reading that. He was at an event with a guy named C.J. Box. You can keep up with him, but he writes fictional crime stories. He was here at the Richmond Library last week. So, and the great thing about fictional crime stories is when I read them, I get ideas about cases I'm involved in or cases I did in the past. So there's a couple out there that never got solved that still bug me, still prey on my mind.
Yeah. So how do you feel about being portrayed as a fictional character? Well, actually a real character, but in a fictional setting, such as with the new Hulu series that you mentioned. Is it the Murdaugh Murders? Is that what it's called?
I think that's what it's called.
We'll say that actor did not look like you.
Doesn't look like me, doesn't sound like me. He has a foghorn, cleghorn, and you just heard how I speak. And there's a scene where he grabs Paul in a bond hearing to get him to stand up and says, stand the F up. I've never done that in my life. And that didn't happen with Paul and I. So in the whole factual scenario they have after the boat case, they have the whole family going to the Bahamas. Never happened.
I didn't think it did.
No,
I
it
thought
never happened.
It was made up.
And the housekeeper, when they get back from the Bahamas, has like a heart attack or whatever on the steps, carrying the bags up. She's been dead 2 years by then. I mean, it's just all jumbled up. And they got Alec running around cheating on Maggie. And there's no evidence of that. Matter of fact, all the evidence is the contrary to that. If Maggie had seen a domestic lawyer, if Maggie had expressed to anybody that she thought Alec was cheating on her, you don't think that would have come up in the trial? I mean, it's beyond belief. I mean, that would have been a much better motive than trying to distract from money he stole. So, I stopped watching it after, I guess, maybe 1.25 episodes. The New York Post called me and said to me, this is before it came out, and I'd seen who they'd cast for me. Doesn't look anything like me. He's short, weighs more than I do. And they said, if you had one suggestion to give him to better portray you, what would it be? And I said, Ozempic.
Okay.
So, in that accent, oh my God. Although watching the woman, she won the Academy Award, that plays Maggie, she did a pretty good job. And the guy who played Alec looked like him, and a British guy sounded like him. I mean, I thought those were, and Buster and Paul and Randolph Murdaugh, Alec's father, who I knew very, very well. And I knew the grandfather, Buster, he's not in the movie, but that I know of. But it's just, they make up stuff. Look, as long as they say based on fact, I guess that's okay. But it is not a factual portrayal.
Right. Yeah, I had read enough and knew enough about the case that I kept, when I was watching it, going, no, that didn't happen. No, that didn't happen. Oh, why is that? That timeline's weird. Oh, and it's...
Yeah, no. And if almost everything that's been on about the Murdaugh case, whether it was Netflix or this or others, had not been accurate. I mean, in the sense of what I know as facts, because, I represented Paul a year before he was killed. I represented him on the boat case. I knew all about that. I know every fact there is on all of it. And all of them are slanted towards showing Alec as a depraved murderer. And again, we're going to be arguing our appeal here in the near future, I think. And I believe there's a substantial chance we get a new trial. So we'll get to drive this route one more time.
Well, that will be interesting. Hope you get this book launched before that because you're going to be busy.
Well, I was launching December 12th. I'm sorry, December 16th. And I would remind your listeners they can go online and pre-order right now. And I most probably will be in a community near you.
I mean, you're definitely going to be in Charleston and
Columbia, and we shoehorned in a bookstore in Florence. I mean, if you don't go to Florence, Pee Wee's hometown, I got how many? Can't tell you. Innumerable people have called me and said, when I was a guy from Sumter, when I was a kid, my dad knew Pee Wee, and Pee Wee would come by. He was a roofer, and Pee Wee was a roofer, and Pee Wee would come by to pick up goods or something to help with some roofing job. He said, I rode around that hearse with Pee Wee, me and my friends, on a number of occasions. I mean, everybody knew him. He wasn't some recluse that lived off in the woods. He fixed cars. He did plumbing work. I talked to a judge whose roof he'd replaced. I mean, everybody knew him. And he was very popular. And they knew he
Wasn't he also really small? Isn't that why he had that nickname?
5'2". Yeah, Pee Wee. He was, and of course, fascinating during the trial, his lawyer, which Jack Sroing I mentioned, who was 6'6" and weighed 400 pounds. So when you saw them together, it was pretty stark. We used to make fun of Jack about that. And Pee Wee, I'm not sure this is in the book, but Pee Wee, massive escape artist. He escaped so many times from jails, escaped from that juvenile facility like 8 times. He had escaped from a couple of courthouses. So they gave him some Valium or some sort of Valium-like drug to take to calm him down. He saved him up, apparently, and one day took them all. So in the middle of the trial, and Pee Wee's head hits the table, and we can't revive him. So Jack picks him up like a little baby and carries him over to the elevator, takes him down the holding cell. Pee Wee thought they'd take him to the hospital, we believe, where he could break out. Mm-hmm. But took him where this relatively new courthouse had an elevator went down to a subterranean holding cell, no windows, no way out, where they got a medic to come see him and figured out he'd overdosed and gave him something. He was back in court that afternoon. But he was always trying to figure a way out to avoid the consequence. And he did it a number of times.
Definitely a colorful character, and probably best that he is not with us anymore and not on the streets.
Well, he, again, 2 weeks before he should be executed, tried to have my 4-year-old daughter kidnapped and held hostage so he could get free. Till the end. I mean, remorse, regret, not in his vocabulary.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on the book. This has been
a
great conversation. My listeners are really going to enjoy it. I thank you so much for taking the time. We will get the book promoted for you, and I encourage everyone to check it out. And great job. I know writing a book is not easy, even if you've got help. It's a lot of work. A lot of work.
It is. I've learned a lot.
Kudos to you.
I've learned a lot.
It definitely is. Well, I hope you enjoy your Thanksgiving.
You too.
And have a good rest of the weekend and feel better.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
This brings us to the conclusion of this episode of Missing in the Carolinas. If you enjoyed this episode, please do me a favor and give it a 5-star rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd also like to support the show in a small way, you can buy me a coffee over at buymeacoffee.com, Renee Robertson. I currently don't receive any compensation for this podcast, so every little bit helps me continue producing new content. We're also on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube, so please like our pages and get started on a discussion of the missing people profiled on the show. Do you know of a missing persons case in North or South Carolina that you think should be covered? Email me at missinginthecarolinas@gmail.com with any details you can share. And don't forget to check out our sponsor, Wow Women on Writing, and the great programs and writing contests they have there at wow-womenonwriting.com. Cover art for this podcast was designed by Macintosh Multimedia. All episodes are researched and written by me, Renee Robertson, with sound editing provided by Daniel Robertson. Thanks so much for listening.